This story, believe it or not, will be true to me. This story begins around late April, early May of last year, and also in mid-August of last year. I live in northern Pennsylvania, and everywhere you look, there's nothing but woods that surround my town. I've lived in the wood my entire life, and I moved out into the town when I was 17. I'm 18 now, so it's been about a year since I stepped into the woods. As I said, this happens in late April, early May of this year, when the sighting happened. On one of my off days, I decided to go hike in my old woods. I didn't have a car, so I had to have one of my friends drive me out. Once I messaged him, we'll call him R for short, he came out and picked me up. I had my backpack full of water and snacks since I planned on being out there for a while. Once R dropped me off, it was around 3:30 p.m. I told him if I didn't message him around 6 or 7, to come looking for me. He agreed and we went on our way. The path I took was a pleasant route since it leads you to the start to a water reservoir that expands to the length of a few miles. The path itself was about 1.5 miles itself, but it was a pleasant walk, and I was happy to be back in such a familiar area. Due to the fact that I grew up living in the area my entire life, I knew almost every inch of the area and could tell that something was just by looking at it. Birds were chirping, there was a slight breeze, the sun was shining, and it was great. And that's when things went silent. I was about halfway down the trail when everything went silent at first. I thought it was odd, but I figured that I was walking the animals and if they went quiet, because that would freak them out maybe. But I also noticed that the wind stopped as well. Strange, I thought. The forecast said it was going to be a windy day, but I just chalked it up to the terrain. The way the path is that there is a hill covered in thick overgrowth and trees on the right side of the path, and on the left side of the path is almost a complete drop off to the reservoir. So as I said, I just assumed that the wind stopped due to my location. That's when I saw it. I rounded a bend to see this massive buck in the middle of the path. It wasn't uncommon to see bucks in this area, but not of this size. Just by the look at this buck, I noticed that it was facing away from me, so I'm not sure how I managed to get this close to it. If, say, I was about a good 10 yards from it, I then noticed it was a 12 point. My first thought was that he is lucky to have made it this far without someone snagging him. But then, things got weird. I noticed he had a long tail. I mean long. I'd say almost as long as a German Shepherd. Then, it turned its face towards me, and I swear to God this thing's face was just pure skull. There was no skin or fur on his face at all, just pure bone. Its eyes was blood red, almost as if someone poured red paint straight into the sockets. And that's when it smiled. Yes, smiled. It grinned from end to end, and I saw that it had massive teeth that looked like it could easily bring down a fully grown bear. Then by the grace of God or by pure luck, it walked away. It walked up the hill, through the undergrowth, and I swear, I heard it laughing. It was near silent, but it sounded like a mix of a heavy wheeze and a soft laugh. I then took the opportunity to run back to where I entered. I ran so fast, I thought I was going to die from lack of oxygen. Once I got to where I started, I finally caught my breath. I then looked behind me, and I swear that thing was standing in the woods. I mean standing, like on 2 legs like a human. It then got back on all 4s, and with the same sinister smile, slowly walked back into the woods. I wanted to collapse, but I knew if I stayed any longer I would risk that thing coming after me. I started my journey home, since I had to walk back since R had to work on his dad's truck after he dropped me off. I then looked at my watch, and it was 5 o'clock. At least I got something out of it. But on my way home, all I could think of is what I saw. And only one word came to mind. And that word was wendigo. Once I got home, I let R know that I was home. I then messaged my other friend, who we'll call K, about what happened. We are both big into stuff like the wendigo and skinwalker, so he believed me when I told him my story. He asked if I plan on going back, and I said not anytime soon, but when I do, I'm bringing one of my machetes. Fast forward to mid-August, and I finally decide to go back. But this time, I had K, his cousin, who we will call J, with me as well. They had their own knives, since none of us were allowed to carry handguns. So, we got to the location and we started to hike. There was a slight frost on the ground, so we could hear anything that was coming, but we made an idea of going at night. But lucky for us, Kay had some extra flashlights in the truck. As we got closer to the spot, we kept hearing noises like footsteps coming from behind us. And when we turned to see what it was, nothing was there. Then once we looked behind us, a white owl flew past over the top of our heads and landed on the trees overhead. I knew there were owls in this area, but I always thought they were just brown and barn owls. If never in my life until that point, I never saw a white owl. We then decided to go back, since we took the owl as a sign to leave, and once we got closer to the truck, I decided to pull a risky maneuver. There was a small field to our left that people used to play in. They used to use it for their guns in hunting season. It was a typical field with high grass next to a tree line. I looked at K and J and told them my plan. They tried desperately to change my mind, but the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to do it. So I told the group to just keep an eye on my flashlight. If it stays normal, I'm fine. If it goes strobe mode, run for the truck. So I went into the field and I felt my friend's eyes watching me. It was going well until I heard a twig snap. I thought it was the guys following me, and as I turned to confront them, I would have never kept walking there. There in the tree line, with those red eyes and evil smile. I couldn't believe what happened next. I swear I heard this thing say in almost deep guttural voice, "Please don't be afraid. I just want hell." I then walked as fast as I could, not to alarm the others. Looking back to make sure it wasn't following me, every time I looked back, it was still standing there, just silently laughing as it did before. I met up with my friends. They knew something was wrong. They told me my face was pale. My eyes were dilated so badly that they thought I was gonna collapse. I told them we have to leave before it's too late. As we got into the truck and made one final look into the field and saw nothing. I still go up there time and time again to visit family, but I refuse to ever step foot in that part of the woods again. After a stressful day of work, I had gone over to my friend's apartment to shoot the breeze, eat some food, and play some games on my friend's PS4. It was getting late and I had to be up fairly early the next day. My friend walked me to the parking lot to my car. There was no one else in the parking lot, just us two. As I was unlocking my car, a dog walked out from the side of a nearby building about 20 feet away. It came fully into view and stopped to look at us. It was a little bigger than a standard Great Dane. It was all black with long hair that appeared to be falling out in clumps. It had long ears and a long, scraggly tail. I remember making eye contact with it. It had dark, maroon-colored eyes, and in the moment we locked eyes, it smiled at us. But instead of a dog's lips going up and back, the lips went slightly sideways and I saw white human teeth. I recall suddenly getting a feeling of dread and fear. I felt like it was something disguised as a dog pretending to be a dog. But it wasn't a dog. I'm certain of it. The energy coming off this thing didn't feel like a dog. I don't know how else to describe it, but my hair went up on end. It turned around from us and began limping slowly back around the corner from where it had come. It seemed to have most of its weight on its front two legs, walking with a hunched back. When it was limping away, I noticed its rear left foot was wrapped in blue gauze, and the foot looked very odd. The heel was actually parallel to the ground. I'm unsure if my friend saw exactly what I saw, but she suddenly said, "It's leaving. Let's follow it." And she ran after the damn thing, right after it disappeared around the corner. I remember being scared for my friend, so I went sprinting after her. I rounded the corner to find my friend looking around confused. The dog thing was gone. At the rate that it was walking and limping, and giving the close proximity to us, which again was no more than 20 feet, there was no way it would have disappeared that quickly. The air was suddenly extremely cold, even for South Texas in January. My teeth were chattering and I told my friend to quickly go back to her apartment, lock the door, and stay inside. I wondered that this thing was not a dog, and I told her I'd text her when I got home. Once safe at home, I texted my friend, and thought that it was going to be the end of it. But even as I settled into bed, my heart was racy. It didn't help that around 12 a.m. there was a low whistling right outside my window. My neighbor's house is not too far from mine, but they're good people and there is no logical reason for them to be that close to my window at night, whistling. I didn't make any indication that I was aware of the whistling. It wasn't even musical, just the sort of like someone just whistling to try to get someone's attention. I didn't make any indication that I was aware of the whistling. It wasn't even musical, just the sort of whistle someone is giving if they're trying to get your attention. Eventually the whistling stopped and I heard nothing else. I had trouble sleeping that night. I hadn't seen or experienced anything like it. I grew up in a rural farming village of about 5,000 people in northern Canada. I lived on my parents' farm about 25 minutes outside of the village. At the time, I never thought of this as being a supernatural related thing, because there are a few bears and packs of coyotes, who I never see but you can hear them howling every night in the area. But my parents have always had terrible luck with raising farm animals. Our barn cats always disappeared or would show up around the house with patches of fur missing and exposed wounds. But we always assumed they were just fighting with other feral cats or animals. We had a small herd of about 14 sheep and 2 llamas to guard the flock. Maybe 30 chickens and 2 pigs, whose pens were more situated in the dense woods that surrounded our house and property. It sounds totally made up and hokey, but my parents actually got the house and 15-acre property at a really good deal because hay didn't grow well in the fields, and a previous owner had died on the property, and it was never solved if it was a suicide or if his wife had murdered him. It sounds fake, but it's definitely real. This is all while I was still in high school. Over the course of a week, there was a massive slaughter where all but one of our sheep was killed, and our smaller llama was slaughtered as well. It was bizarre, because none of them were actually eaten or dragged off. They were just slaughter. There's no better word for it. It was a senseless, violent culling. We called the CO, and he came and killed 2 bears and trapped another. We heard later that our neighbor shot another, and it was thought that a mother bear with 3 yearling cubs had been the cause of the killing. According to the CO, it was a bizarre phenomenon and we were just terribly unlucky, because none of our neighbors' animals were touched. Our nearest neighbors are about 1 kilometer away, but there's a cow field directly behind the field our sheep grazed in. A few months later, something came and scared half our flock of chickens to death. It just had, heart attacks, presumably, and died. None of them were touched. They all just were dead. And then, a few months after I came home from school one day, I always got home from school around 4 when the bus dropped me off while my parents didn't get home until at least 5, so I had to go and haul hay to the livestock and feed water to the chickens. It was almost summer, so it was warm and we let the chickens out to roam. Our yard had tons of bugs in it with tall grass, so they enjoyed it. I came home to find all of them dead, but what was even stranger was, there were no bodies. I searched the yard and the field, but there were only individual piles of feathers. No blood, no guts, no bodies. It looked like they just combusted where they stood into piles of feathers. There was some slobber on a few of the feathers, so I just assumed a coyote got them or something, but it always seemed really bizarre to me. There was no blood or anything like that. Literally just piles of feathers dotted around the yard. Nothing ever touched our pigs though, but sometimes I could hear them screeching and squealing at night and running full force around their pet from my window. They were decently far from the house, but they were loud. Often they would break out of their fencing, and my brother and I would have to find them hiding somewhere around the yard. Soon after, my parents had them slaughtered for their meat because the repairs and getting them back in their pen was becoming too much for them to deal with. I also got the feeling of being watched for years from those woods. that were around our house. Any time I would go by near them, I swear I could hear talking coming from there. It sounded almost like an old TV or newscasters or something. Sometimes when I visit that house, I still hear the talking. It's kind of creepy. I'm not sure if it was a wendigo. I used to read those old Darren Zanko ghost story books as a little kid, and I remember being freaked out by one in particular, about a wendigo. It was about a woman who had taken a wendigo's bones, and another wendigo had broken into her house to get them back. It terrified me. Since then, I've had a massively irrational fear about wendigos. My brother and I grew up on a rural northern Canadian farm surrounded by dense woodland, fields, in a large swamp with no neighbors for at least a kilometer. Out by the swamp, which is half surrounded by forest and half surrounded by a field, there's a shack that sits halfway planted in the ground. It always gave me bad vibes. My mom said it was probably used to store preserves when the house was built in the 1800s, but it still scared me. I would swear that something unnatural lived in it, but my mom would always try to tell me that there was nothing to worry about. My mother is a biologist and an avid nature painter. She loves finding skulls and things like that to paint on or just collect and study. One day, during the summer of 2010, while walking our dogs with my brother, she found a large skull that she thought might be a wolf or a bear's. It still had meat and gore on it, so she took it and put it in a trash bag and left it hanging on a tree next to her house. Thought behind this was that the meat would rot off and she would identify it. She put it on a tree so that animals wouldn't get to it. Like when you take camping safety and they tell you to put backpacks and stuff into trees. She left it all sitting all summer. I'm still not sure why she never went back to grab it. Maybe she just figured it would be too gross to open. But I saw it sitting out in that tree all summer and fall. In October 2010, when I was barely 15 and my brother was 11, we got a copy of Fallout New Vegas. We were obsessed and would play it till 3 or 4 every day. Our couch is in the center of our living room, but the TV in the front of it and a desk, chair, and easel where my mom paints behind it. In front of my mom's desk, there's a large window, beside it a door that leads out to our back deck. One night, at maybe around 2 a.m., we're playing our game and we hear what sounds like walking on our back deck. The wood is thumping under the weight of something that we can hear. The boards are creaking. Being the shitty older sibling I am, I tell my brother to go over to the window and check what it is, saying it was probably just a coyote or something like that wandering around the house. He walks over and immediately starts freaking out. He runs and locks the door. Living on a farm with no neighbors, my parents always leave our doors unlocked. He runs back to where I am sitting on the couch. He says it's a monster. I'm too scared to go up and look. It's very dark outside, but I swear I could see a massive form standing outside the window, with intent eyes lit up. The reflection on the TV screen. It looked like it was standing in 2 legs, with long arms. I couldn't see a lot of details and look back, and I'm glad I didn't. We sat there, trying not to breathe or break eye contact with this thing, worried that if we did, it would find a way to get in and attack us. The thing does not make any sort of movement. Then eventually, I say that we're probably imagining things and we should go back to playing our game. I just wanted to make my brother feel better and to try to distract myself. But the entire rest of the night I could feel myself on edge, willing myself to not look back out that window. We wait until the sun starts rising before finally going to bed. Growing up there, I often got the feeling of being watched in the woods when I let the dogs out to pee at night. I was always too scared to leave the safety of the house and would stand in the doorway, listening to the woods until the dogs came back to me. I don't know definitively what it was, but my brother and I will always swear that it was a wendigo. So I'm a 16-year-old male, and I live in the suburbs on the East Coast in a town with a population of about 25,000 people. It was a normal night a couple years ago. I don't remember exactly what I was doing that night except that I was on my way home when this happened. I was in the car with my dad and my little brother. My dad is an alcoholic, and used to verbally and physically abuse my whole family. And as much as I'd love to divulge into the horror of my upbringing, this is the only detail that is relevant, because even though my father is now sober, I'm still very uncomfortable around him. But my little brother was too young to remember much of when he was abusive, so they're much closer. So, when we ride in the car, my brother sits in the front, with my dad talking about whatever, and I sit in the back listening to music with my headphones falling into my thoughts while staring out the window. This night, while I was on my way home, was no different. I remember we were almost back, maybe about 5 minutes away, and we were coming up on a passing church. I got immediate goosebumps when I laid eyes on it. Then I was rushed with an overwhelming feeling of terror, and couldn't look away from the church as we grew nearer and nearer, fearing something bad would happen if I did. Now I listen to a lot of scary stories, and I have read many myself. I love to go to haunted houses and explore the woods and abandoned places with my friends. So, this was an unexpected feeling of terror on a completely normal night, surrounded by what I knew as a safe place. As we got near to the church, I can see 2 deer in front of it on the lawn. One is laying on its side, and the other is standing. It has its head bent towards the other's stomach. The deer on its side is dead, and the other deer has giant black horns that almost look like the horns on the helmet Hela wears in the Marvel movie Thor Ragnarok. They were absolutely massive. Looked like the deer shouldn't have been able to support their weight. I am frozen in fear when I realized the one standing up is devouring the deer that was dead on his side. It looked up at me straight in the eyes. I felt cold and angry. I knew any intentions this thing had were malicious. This weird, but locking eyes with it almost made me feel like it knew me. Like it stared into my soul and explored every nook and cranny in my brain. Thinking about the feeling still sends a shiver down my spine, because it was so unnatural, so uncomfortable, and terrifying. But you could say that to describe anything about this creature, honestly. The skin had begun to rot off its face, and I could see parts of its skull. Had sharp, shiny teeth, and was covered in blood. My father and brother didn't notice anything, and thought maybe I was seeing things. But that primal fear convinced me it was real, because I've never felt any kind of fear as real as what this felt like. I was truly scared for my life. In those few moments passing by this thing, I could feel its rage. It was almost tangible. It felt awful. I knew it wanted to kill anything or anyone, and it would do anything for the satisfaction. I was scared that me noticing it made me its next target, which would explain why I was the only one affected by its presence. My brother and father both were unalarmed enough to not even notice it, but thank God I was in the car, and we passed it, and that night went on as usual. I couldn't stop thinking about it though. So I went to the church the next day early in the morning and found a dead deer. All of its fur was skinned off and it had a huge hole in it. Upon looking inside, I saw that its body was completely hollow. No blood or organs, no nothing. But it wasn't flat. It looked like it was still intact. It had just died and had no fur. It was gone before the day was over. I still have no idea what happened that night, but I haven't seen anything similar, and I don't know if it was a skinwalker or not. All I know is that it scared the hell out of me, and I hope I never see anything like it again.